Selina Blackwell sat at her usual table in the ladies' dining room at the Holborn restaurant, pen poised over the pages of her private journal. The waiter brought her tea and scones, but she barely noticed, absorbed as she was in recounting the day's events. It was May 1st, 1892. She had attended Sunday Mass that morning with her father and sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth was radiant as always, golden hair pinned elegantly beneath her hat, blue eyes sparkling with barely contained exuberance as she greeted neighbors and friends. Selina, by contrast, felt drab and unremarkable beside her sister's vivacious beauty. She stood stiffly in her dark, high-collared dress, forcing a polite smile as she endured the usual pleasantries. After the service ended, Selina had quickly taken her leave, intending to retreat to her favorite haunt to pour her discontent onto the pages of her diary. But on the steps of the church, she quite literally ran into Father Mitchell, the young priest who had recently arrived to head up their parish. "Miss Blackwell, I do beg your pardon," he exclaimed, reaching out a hand to steady her. "It's quite all right, Father," Selina murmured, flustered by his closeness and the sensation of his hand on her arm. She had always found the priest rather handsome, with his dark hair and kind, intelligent eyes. Recovering herself, she inquired politely after his efforts to raise funds for the new orphanage. To her surprise and dismay, Father Mitchell's eyes softened and his tone grew warm as he replied, "Your sister Miss Elizabeth has been instrumental in our efforts. She recently donated your late mother's treasured locket to the cause. An extraordinary act of generosity." Selina felt a sharp pang in her chest at this revelation. Mother's locket? Given away by Elizabeth without a word to her or father. She swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "How wonderful," she managed. "Elizabeth has such a charitable spirit." Eager to change the subject, Selina told the priest of her apprenticeship at Mr. Wilson's apothecary shop. But it was clear his mind was elsewhere, no doubt still on Elizabeth and her magnanimous gift. He bid Selina good day and continued on his way. Now, sitting alone at the Holborn, Selina struggled to make sense of her roiling emotions. Hurt that Elizabeth had given away a cherished memento of their mother without consulting the family. Anger at the favoritism everyone always showed her sister. And beneath it all, an aching, gnawing loneliness. Even before mother fell ill and passed away, Selina had never felt she truly belonged. She was too bookish, too fascinated by strange and morbid things. Only her studies with Mr. Wilson and her hours tending her secret poison garden gave her any real sense of satisfaction. The weeks passed in a blur of activity as Elizabeth and Jonah's engagement celebrations kicked into high gear. Selina threw herself into her work at the apothecary, trying to ignore the hurt she felt at being relegated to the sidelines. Cousin Marian's unexpected arrival was a welcome distraction. The two young women had always been close, united by their unconventional interests and resistance to society's expectations. "Selina, you'll never believe what I learned in Vienna," Marian said conspiratorially one afternoon as they took tea in the garden. "There's a secret school there where women study medicine, surgery, even. Can you imagine?" Selina's eyes widened. The very idea seemed radical, transgressive. And yet, a thrill went through her at the thought of it. Her mind, that was always ferreting out nature's hidden secrets, laid bare on a surgical table. She shook herself. Such things weren't for well-bred English ladies. Still, Marian's words lingered, even as the household kicked into a flurry of activity with Elizabeth's engagement ball fast approaching. Selina tried to muster enthusiasm as she helped her sister select flowers and plan the menu, but her resentment simmered, along with darker thoughts she dared not acknowledge, even to herself. The night of the ball arrived. Selina watched from the window as carriages dropped off guests bedecked in all their finery. Elizabeth was a vision, shining brighter than ever on Jonah's arm. As the happy couple took a turn in the garden, Selina overheard her aunt remark to a friend, "What a pair they make, the sun and moon. She lights up the world, while Selina is as remote and mysterious as the stars." Remote and mysterious. The words echoed in Selina's mind long into the night, as she lay sleepless, listening to the sounds of revelry below. Is that how people saw her? Cold and distant, an afterthought compared to her radiant sister? The unfairness of it all brought hot tears to her eyes. It was then that the idea first came to her, rising slowly from the shadowed depths of her psyche. Could be so easy. All those hours spent poring over botanical texts, memorizing the properties of plants both healing and deadly. A few drops sipped from a tainted teacup. Selina wept then, not from sorrow or guilt, but from the terrifying realization that she was entirely capable of such a thing. The darkness she had always sensed within herself went far deeper than she'd ever acknowledged. In that moment, she knew with inexplicable certainty that all her future happiness hinged on her sister's destruction. The next morning, Selina braved the bright sunlight with grim determination, a plan already forming. She started small. When Elizabeth complained of a headache, Selina sweetly offered to steep her a soothing herbal tea. She watched with rapt attention as her sister sipped the fragrant brew, gauging its effects. The headache worsened. Then came fever, nausea, spells of faintness. Nothing too severe. Yet, Sel, you've always been so clever with your potions, Elizabeth murmured weakly from her sickbed a few days later. If anyone can make me well, it's you. The trust in her sister's eyes made Selina want to scream, or laugh, if only she knew. Selina bided her time, slowly increasing the doses, varying the poison to keep the symptoms unpredictable. She devoted herself to Elizabeth's care, ever the concerned sister. She coaxed broth and medicine past her lips, sponged the sweat from her brow. All the while, a thrill of dark satisfaction unfurled within her chest. No one suspected, not her father, lost in his impenetrable fog of grief. Not dear, naive Jonah. Even the eminent doctors they called in from London were baffled. Only Selina knew the truth that hid behind her mask of devotion. By the time anyone thought to connect Elizabeth's wasting illness to the tea Selina so lovingly prepared, it was too late. She took her last, rattling breaths with her hand clutched in her sister's, Selina cooing reassurances. There now, Lizzie. It will all be over soon. You can rest now. In the awful silence after, Selina wept alongside the others. But her tears were born of relief, of terrible giddy elation. The deed was done. Elizabeth, her lifelong tormentor, dead by her own hand. She was free. The weeks following the funeral passed in a macabre dream. Selina drifted through the motions of mourning like a sleepwalker, a small, secret smile playing around her mouth. She accepted condolences with appropriate solemnity, all the while marveling inwardly at how easy it had been to orchestrate her sister's demise. No one knew. No one even suspected Saint Selina, the devoted sister-turned-nursemaid. She had planned it all so carefully, like the scientist she was at heart. The various herbs administered in subtle doses. The gaslighting of a household already primed to blame Elizabeth's decline on the same mysterious ailment that had claimed their mother. It was almost too easy. But as the weeks churned on, a creeping unease took root in Selina's chest. She kept catching Inspector St. John watching her. His keen eyes narrowed in thought. He had been around more than usual since Elizabeth took ill, claiming he had further inquiries to make. Selina studiously avoided him, keeping to her tower room or the dark recesses of her poison garden. But his presence nagged at her. What if he suspected? The police had found nothing amiss when Mother died, but a second tragedy in the same family, by the same means, stretched credulity. She took to spying on him from the window as he stalked the garden, turning over rocks, pocketing bits of aconite that had survived the season. He was clearly looking for something. Evidence? Selina's heart pounded with mingled fear and anticipation. Part of her almost hoped he would piece it together, out of sheer amazement that a man could unravel her perfect crime. The rest of her knew that discovery would mean ruin, prison or worse. And for what? Vengeance against a sister who had never meant to wrong her? The freedom to step out of Elizabeth's suffocating shadow? No. She couldn't let herself be caught. Not now, when her new life was just beginning. Selina Blackwell had always been the clever one, the dark horse. She had eliminated her rival with the dispassionate skill of a surgeon. Now, as the inspector drew ever closer to the truth, she would have to do it again. Only this time, her opponent was a worthy one. A man whose intelligence and perception rivaled her own. The game, she realized with a shiver of delight, was just beginning. Inspector Thomas St. John paced the gloomy interior of the Blackwell Library, frustration burning in his gut. His latest interview with the dead girl's father had proven fruitless. Again, he could feel the shape of it, the wrongness lurking beneath this family's tragedies. But every time he tried to grasp it, it slithered away like mist through his fingers. Elizabeth Blackwell's death was almost identical to her mother's. The gradual decline, the baffling symptoms, the unexplained toxins ravaging young, healthy bodies. But where Catherine Blackwell's death had been a random tragedy, Elizabeth's felt pointed, purposeful. The hairs on the back of St. John's neck prickled. He was being watched. Slowly, he turned to the window overlooking the garden. There, half concealed by a velvet curtain, stood Selina Blackwell. Her pale, angular face was utterly still as she stared down at him, but her dark eyes blazed with a strange intensity. St. John met her gaze, unflinching. In that moment, he knew, with a detective's unshakable instinct, that this fragile-looking young woman with the coal-black hair and porcelain skin was in fact the most dangerous creature he had ever beheld. He had seen her tending the gardens, when she thought herself unobserved, touching the leaves of the aconite and foxglove with a weird sort of reverence. At the funeral, accepting condolences with the glazed expression of an actress playing a role, preparing cup after cup of herbal tea for her dying sister. The tea, of course. That had to be the key. St. John thought of the reports from the doctors, the mysterious alkaloids they could not identify. He pictured those pale, elegant hands tamping vials of powder, steeping poisonous leaves in delicate china cups. He would need proof. A confession would be better. He had a feeling Selina Blackwell would relish the chance to boast of her own cleverness, if she thought her audience a worthy one. Tipping his hat to her in an ironic salute, St. John turned on his heel and strode from the library, mind churning. He would lay his trap carefully, methodically, just as she had done. And when the moment was ripe, he would spring it and watch her hang for her crimes. It was more than a quest for justice, he realized. It was a challenge, a matching of wits with a foe whose intelligence equaled and perhaps even surpassed his own. The thought sent a dark thrill down his spine. Selina watched the inspectors retreating back, her lips curling in a small, secret smile. So, he knew, what a delicious game this would be. From her poison garden to the hushed streets of London, she would lead him a merry dance. And in the end, only one of them would be left standing. Selina had not come this far to fail now. She would destroy St. John as ruthlessly as she had destroyed her sister, and she would savor every moment. "Your move, Inspector," she whispered, and let the curtain fall back into place. The next few weeks unfolded like a chess match of manners and veiled intentions. Inspector St. John began turning up at the Blackwell house at all hours, on the flimsiest of pretexts. An additional question for Selina's father. The need to re-examine Elizabeth's room. Each time, he made sure to catch Selina's eye, letting her see the determination and burgeoning certainty there. For her part, Selina remained a model of composure. She answered his probing questions with wide-eyed innocence, even as a spark of amusement danced in the depths of her gaze. "More tea, Inspector?" she would inquire sweetly, delighting in the way he flinched away from the proffered cup. It all came to a head one rain-lashed night in late November. Selina sat in her father's library, ostensibly keeping the accounts, but in truth lying in wait. When the knock came at the door, she was ready. "Miss Blackwell." St. John loomed in the doorway, raindrops glistening on the brim of his hat. "I must speak with you, alone." Selina set down her pen with careful, deliberate slowness. "But of course, Inspector, I am always happy to assist the police." She glided to her feet, skirts whispering. "Shall we adjourn to the conservatory? I find the plants soothing." St. John's jaw clenched, but he followed her down the hall and into the glass-walled room, steamy and pungent with nightshade. Selina shut the door behind them with a decisive click. "Well?" she asked, turning to face him. "What is so urgent it could not wait until morning?" "I know what you did." The words fell like stones into the cloying, perfumed air. Selina regarded him steadily, head cocked. "And what is it you imagine I've done, Inspector?" "You killed them," St. John bit out. "Your mother, your sister, poisoned them slowly, under the guise of nursing them." "A bold accusation," Selina murmured. "Have you any proof?" "The poisons used were botanical in nature, rare and difficult to detect. The method speaks to someone with an advanced knowledge of herb lore." His eyes bored into hers. "Someone like an apothecary's apprentice, perhaps?" Selina smiled then, a slow, sphinx-like curl of her lips. "Conjecture and circumstance. You disappoint me, Inspector. I thought you cleverer than that." "You left no evidence to find," he admitted grudgingly. "But the shape of it is clear enough. No one else in this house possesses your skill with plants, or your cold calculation." "So you admit it?" Selina purred, drifting closer. "I have outplayed you." St. John stood his ground, though she could see the tick of a muscle in his stubbled cheek. "Why?" he demanded. "Why kill them? Your own flesh and blood." Selina's smile sharpened. "Oh, Inspector, you cannot fathom the exquisite pleasure of it. The power, watching the life drain from them, drop by drop, and knowing I was the architect of their destruction." She was close enough to touch him now, one white hand drifting up to straighten his collar. He remained rigid, but did not pull away. "I have always been alone, you see," Selina continued softly. "The odd one out, passed over, ignored. In Elizabeth's shadow, her nails dug into the tender skin at his throat. I simply removed that shadow, and oh, how brightly I shone." "You're a monster." St. John's voice was hoarse with loathing.
"No," Selina whispered.
"I am an artist. I looked into the abyss of my own soul and made it a thing of terrible beauty." And then, before he could react, she yanked him forward by the collar and crashed her lips to his. The kiss was brutal, all teeth and fury, a clashing of two iron wills. St. John made a strangled sound, hands flexing convulsively at his sides. For one white-hot moment, Selina thought he might seize her, wrench her against him, but then he was shoving her away, hard enough to send her stumbling back against the conservatory table. Here is the continuation of the story. They stared at each other, chests heaving, twin storms of revulsion and fascination brewing in their eyes. St. John wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, as if he could erase the taste of her. "This is finished," he said raggedly. "I will see you brought to justice, Miss Blackwell. Make no mistake." Selina laughed, a breathy, unhinged sound. "Justice? What justice can there be for one such as I? I who have looked into the face of my darkest self and embraced it." She drew herself up to her full height, squaring her shoulders beneath the black silk of her gown. In that moment, she seemed taller, more regal than St. John had ever seen her. A dark queen, terrible in her majesty. "You may try to stop me, Inspector," she said calmly, "but you will fail. I am Selina Blackwell. I have destroyed giants. You are but a man." With that, she swept past him, skirts whispering over the flagstones. At the door, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "Catch me if you can, Inspector," she murmured. "I do so love a good game." And then she was gone, leaving St. John alone amidst the cloying scents of belladonna and oleander, the phantom pressure of her lips still burning against his own. He sank onto a wrought iron bench, legs suddenly unsteady. He had finally glimpsed the true face of his quarry, and the sight had shaken him to his core. Selina Blackwell was no mere murderess. She was something far more deadly, a woman unbound by conscience or fear, exulting in her own damnation. A poison maiden, lovely and lethal in equal measure. And yet, some part of him thrilled to the challenge she presented. The gauntlet she had thrown down. "Catch me if you can." St. John squared his jaw, eyes hardening with resolve. Very well. If it was a game she wanted, a game she would have. He would match his wits against hers, stalk her through the drawing rooms and dark alleys of London, until the final seismic confrontation. Only one of them would walk away when the dust settled. St. John vowed it would be him. He might be but a man, but he was also the law, and the law would have its reckoning. Rising from the bench, he settled his hat firmly back onto his head, a lone sentinel against the encroaching night. With one last glance at the nightmare conservatory, he strode out into the rain, the hunt already burning in his blood. Selina was waiting for him by the front gate, a cloak of black velvet clasped at her pale throat. As he emerged from the house, she smiled, slow and scintillating. "So it begins," she called, voice carrying on the hissing wind. "I wish you luck, Inspector. You shall certainly need it." Then she was gone, swallowed whole by the maw of the night. St. John watched her go, grim expectation settling into his marrow. Yes, so it began. The dance macabre between the law and the lawless, the virtuous and the venal. He knew, with sudden inexorable certainty, that this waltz of shadows would come to define him, haunt him, perhaps even consume him utterly. But it was too late to turn back now. The die had been cast, the first move made. All that remained was to see it through to its bone-jarring conclusion. Selina was out there, cloaked in darkness and her own depthless cunning, waiting for him, taunting him. St. John set his shoulders against the pelting rain and quickened his step. For better or worse, the game was afoot, and he would be damned before he let her win.